I know that it's Thursday afternoon. At least it's Thursday afternoon right now as I'm posting this episode, but we're doing something different this week. We usually post our main episode on Sunday, but I've been looking for ways to make this podcast more useful for you, more relevant to the current moment. One of the ways to do this is to discuss key news stories shortly after they happen. We've done this before. Last year, we published off schedule during the D23 Expo and also when Hurricane Ian shut down Disney World. Yesterday, Disney webcast its third quarter earnings call, so today we're going to roll out our second news and analysis episode for the month. To be clear, this episode is not only about the earnings call. We'll talk about major developments for the Disney company over the past month, but we'll also rely on some information from yesterday's earnings call to support stories in this episode. I'm guessing that at least for a few regular listeners, that this episode may be more relevant on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday than it would on Sunday. So, 4 days ago, we posted our first news and analysis episode for the month, which was focused solely on the state and future of the American resorts. Today, we have our news and analysis episode focused on the state of the Disney company with some information from that third quarter earnings call. And on Sunday, we'll have a shorter episode to kick off our week together. One more thing. Before we get going today, I want to thank a few more recent Bandcamp subscribers. Without our subscribers, we would simply cease to exist. Gratitude is going out today to Mary Mansion Maid, Antonio G, and Randall. Thanks to each of you for supporting all that we do here. And now, let's jump down into the news. The background for our episode today is a relatively disappointing quarter for Disney, particularly at the box office. Indiana Jones, Haunted Mansion, and Elemental all failed to meet expectations, though Elemental, particularly overseas, has had a noticeable uptick in recent weeks. In Florida, the governor and Disney continue their dispute over the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which may be contributing in a small way to a lower visitation level at Disney World, particularly with older Americans. And then there's Disney Plus. Continued losses on Disney Plus, though these losses were lower than expected, add to the company's problems. Disney Plus lost $500 million, down from $1.1 billion, which is still a very large figure. Overall subscribers to Disney Plus are also on their way down. But one element not explored on the earnings call was how the actors and writers strike affected the financials for Disney Plus. There are two ways to move forward toward profitability: increase prices and cut spending. Disney is trying to do both. But with the writers and actors strike, Disney put on hiatus productions related to the streamer. There are still some costs to carry or store sets, but the strike artificially lowered current production cost, which likely allowed Disney to present a loss that was smaller than expected for Disney Plus. Essentially, the full level of subscription and ad money was still coming in, but less production money was going out due to the strike. So perhaps this smaller loss wasn't related to better management. It might simply be the current inability for the streamer to spend money. But we won't really know this until after the strike. To put it simply, every major sector of the Disney company is presently facing some crisis. Crises that are supposed to be managed overall by CEO Bob Iger. So let's start there with an update to Bob Iger's second term as CEO. Last November, that's November of 2022, Disney announced that Bob Iger would return to oversee Disney as CEO, as then CEO Bob Chapek was essentially being fired. At that time, there were many problem areas within the company, problems that were larger than the ones the company presently faces. The two most obvious at that time were these. First, massive financial losses with its new streaming division, and second, an inability to effectively re-engage the theatrical market with new releases. These problems in part led to a devaluation of the Disney stock from a high of $197 in 2021 down to the mid-$80 range, occasionally leaning up into the lower 90s, which is where the stock has been for many months now. In previous news episodes, we have discussed how the stock price is stuck in this range because Disney lacks projects that will elevate the value of the company. Disney Plus continues to lose money, and this has been a lackluster summer for Disney films on the big screen. After the live-action version of The Little Mermaid, which did reasonably well, Disney walked out very expensive films that underperformed one after another, from Elemental to Dial of Destiny to Haunted Mansion, which at one point the company had hoped would turn around its summer. Beyond these obvious concerns, the company is also struggling to reposition its linear TV networks, such as ABC and ESPN, toward long-term success. Beyond this, the Disney resorts in California and Florida are looking at a long stretch without a new e-ticket attraction or a new themed land. Splash Mountain is being transformed into Tiana's Bayou Adventure, but this is a re-theme of an existing attraction. The layout of the ride, including the flume and drop, will all remain the same, while designers reconfigure the stages to tell a new story. Will a re-themed ride provide a long-term bump similar to that of a new e-ticket? Surely. It will bring in more guests, but probably nothing comparable to a full new e-ticket attraction such as Cosmic Rewind, the Tron Coaster, or Runaway Railway. Add into this some other problems. After Chapek attempted to force most of the Imagineering staff to relocate to Florida, many designers simply found jobs elsewhere in California, leaving that division gutted. The plan to relocate Imagineering and other divisions to Florida has now been scuttled, but the damage has been done. And let's add in one more issue. The removal of Chapek also meant that Iger needed to find a new successor. So when Iger returned, most in the company could easily see the areas that needed attention, also the order in which Iger should approach them, with the streaming issue clearly at the top of the list and that new successor hovering near the bottom. And this has largely defined Iger's time so far. On the earnings call, Iger reaffirmed that 3 business areas, namely films, parks, and streaming, will be the financial center of the company as he sees it moving forward. That is, Iger has rebalanced the company based on how he believes media will change in the years ahead. Noticeably missing on this list of key areas was ABC and the other linear networks that Disney owns, such as ESPN. Iger explained that though these linear networks are profitable now, he sees a future with people leaving cable in droves, where traditional TV networks will be far less profitable. He also indicated that the resources presently used to create content for network TV would be transferred over to other areas of the company, likely meaning Disney Plus. And this brings us up to the main issue for the current moment: financial problems on the Disney streamer. How to manage a streaming system so that it reaches profitability is a problem that Disney and other studios will wrestle with for a while moving forward. Back on May 26th, Disney removed over 30 shows from its streamer. These shows largely were originals produced for Disney Plus, including Willow, The World According to Jeff Goldblum, The Mighty Ducks, and Turner and Hooch. In return, Disney can classify these shows collectively as a loss and take a write-down of roughly $2.4 billion. Basically, these shows are no longer bringing in new subscribers, so they are more valuable to the company as a mechanism to reduce their taxes than they are as content on Disney Plus. Their removal likely puts on hiatus various payments to various individuals who created these shows, which further reduces costs. But the reduction of content is not the only way to reduce costs. Each studio seems to have a slightly different plan for ways to improve its streaming service. Paramount Global CEO Bob Bakish believes that creating mega streamers or bundled packages might be the solution, specifically merging Paramount content with that of other studios into bundled packages for higher subscription rates. We've been believers in bundling for a long time, Bakish recently said. Bundling has been one of the tried and true methods of value creation in media, and certainly as we enter the streaming space, bundling is part of our strategy. Essentially, his idea is to merge together content from smaller streamers, such as Paramount, to create a streamer with far more content that will then be able to compete with Disney Plus and Netflix in a higher pricing tier. David Zaslav over at Warner Brothers is also removing content from their streamer, shows such as Westworld and The Time Traveler's Wife, and then licensing that content out to other companies such as Roku to create an income stream with backlist titles. Licensing is another way to increase revenue. Disney's strategy, similar to that of other streamers, has been hit and miss in terms of figuring out how to leverage streaming content toward overall profits for the company. The streamer has had some huge hits, such as The Mandalorian and WandaVision, but the streamer has also trained its audience that it only needs to wait a couple of months for theatrical releases to show up online. This has surely reduced ticket sales at theaters, but has also likely increased Disney Plus's subscription base. The big question: will the streamer make enough money eventually through its subscription base to account for lower revenue at the box office on theatrical titles? Presently, Disney is trying to pull as much money as it can from theatrical releases before shifting them over to Disney Plus. Disney has widened out the gap between theatrical release dates and streaming dates. There were 89 days, nearly 3 months, between the release of Guardians 3 in theaters and the day when it showed up on the streamer. Disney just announced that the live-action version of The Little Mermaid will premiere on Disney Plus on September 6th, which is 103 days after it first showed up in theaters. Though Elemental doesn't yet have an official date for Disney Plus, Disney has announced that the film will show up on Blu-ray and DVD on September 26th, which likely means that the Disney Plus premiere will be in early to mid-October, which is more than 100 days after it first appeared in theaters. All of these look like old-school theatrical release windows, a meaningful gap between the big screen and the small screen. But in many ways, I think it's going to be very difficult for Disney and other studios to recreate the pre-pandemic model for theatrical business. That genie is already out of the bottle. Part of the problem is that the audience knows that Disney content will eventually show up on Disney Plus. This is a problem related to very successful branding campaigns. Everyone knows the core assets of Disney: Marvel, Pixar, Lucasfilm, Disney, and Walt Disney Animation. I realize that there's also Searchlight and 20th Century Fox, but let's put those recent acquisitions aside for a moment. Here is one unfortunate byproduct of successful branding. The public knows exactly what Disney owns, and most of the audience know that any Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, Disney, or Disney Animation title will find its way relatively quickly to Disney Plus. And if they subscribe to Disney Plus, they know this film will be at their house in 2 or 3 months. The connection between film, studio, and streamer is clear and accurate in the minds of most viewers. But let's quickly look at some other releases from less branded studios from this summer. I realize that you might know the answer to these questions, but does the average audience member know which streamer will present the Barbie movie, or Oppenheimer, or Across the Spider-Verse? And if they don't know which streamer, they also don't know if they subscribe to that streamer, where a particular film will eventually land. And if they don't know these things, I think there's a little extra incentive for them to see Barbie or Oppenheimer in the theaters, as they don't know if it's coming to their house with streamers that they already subscribe to. With Disney, for better or worse, it's very clear to most people what Disney owns and what will eventually be on Disney Plus. So the audience knows what's coming to Disney Plus long before those titles get there. But there's another issue intertwined with all of this, one that most studios have been reluctant to accept. The 2-hour feature film may no longer be the sweet spot for a contemporary audience. What streaming has done is to create a venue where longer shows, 6 or 8 or 15 hours in overall length, can exist. For example, in its first week, the most recent trailer for Loki Season 2 racked up a very impressive 80 million views. These numbers suggest significant audience interest for this multi-part drama set to premiere in October. This doesn't mean that the old-school 2-hour movie format is dead. The Barbie movie just did fabulous business at the box office. But it may suggest a changing emphasis in film presentations, one where the present audience is more drawn to an 8-hour story with its additional depth, characterization, and subplots than a traditional 2-hour story that defined the film-going experience for much of the last century. In other words, new technology, such as streaming, has expanded the format possibilities for a film's presentation, and that old mode, which was largely defined by the physical technology of the 1930s up through the 1990s, may mean that the standalone 2-hour summer blockbuster is no longer the most significant way to impact culture with a narrative. Jaws and Star Wars defined this mode in the mid-1970s, but I think we're looking at a culture where longer shows on streaming, such as Stranger Things, Squid Games, The Mandalorian, and Game of Thrones, are quickly becoming more influential than standalone films. I should point out that some films, such as the Harry Potter series, do have this longer structure. In recent years, series films have been very successful, again pointing toward a preference for additional depth and characterization. But in that also, I think there's a practical question. Where is this audience now, in the mid-2020s, more likely to watch a multi-part series at home or at a theater? The long-term trend is for families to increase their time at home with TV and decrease their time in movie theaters. And if home may soon be the preferred location for a majority of the old movie-going audience, how then do you get content that is presented on streaming to bring in as much money as theatrical releases used to bring in before the pandemic? So not only is the delivery technology of entertainment changing, its form is changing as well. But the problems that Bob Iger inherited when he returned to Disney were larger than just the streamer. There were some ongoing problems and changes in the C-suite as well. 6 months after Iger's return, CFO Christine McCarthy announced that she was separating from the company for personal reasons. McCarthy had served as Disney's CFO for 7 years, and particularly in financial circles, was one of the most recognizable executives in the company with a Disney career going back 23 years. At one point, industry writers suggested that McCarthy might be in the running to eventually replace Iger. I'm not so sure this would have happened, though she possesses financial acumen and was able to help steer Disney through the pandemic. She lacks the ability to easily connect with an audience as the sympathetic face of the company. But once she left the company in April, she was no longer a viable candidate to succeed Iger. At this point, the company had no individuals who were clear replacements for Iger when he eventually leaves the company. Also at this time, the Disney board extended Iger's contract from 2 to 4 years. This will help on 2 fronts. Iger is deeply familiar with the problems in both the streaming service and the Disney-owned linear TV networks, which continue to be 2 of the largest areas of concern, and also Iger clearly needed more time to find a successor. Finding a successor was clearly near the bottom of Iger's initial priorities, but this past month, he appears to be making some progress in this area, particularly with Tom Staggs and Kevin Mayer. Staggs was once in the running to be Iger's initial replacement in 2020, but Iger instead gave the job to Bob Chapek. Tom Staggs, before leaving Disney, had a 27-year career with the company, serving as both the chief operating officer and the chief financial officer, and therefore had an understanding of the politics of the Disney C-suite. He had also been president of Disney Parks and Resorts as the company worked toward the Shanghai park and deeply developed new areas in Florida such as Pandora. Staggs left when he believed he lacked the board votes to become CEO, instead starting Candle Media with another ex-Disney executive, Kevin Mayer. Mayer had once overseen the development of the Disney streaming service and had been the chief strategic officer of the company, managing the acquisition and integration of Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm into Disney. But he left Disney 2 months after Chapek became CEO to be CEO of TikTok, presumably because he did not want to work under Chapek. Iger has now engaged Mayer and Staggs as outside consultants, which might be the first step in evaluating how they might perform as leaders of the company. For weeks now, they have helped strategize with Iger, Jimmy Pitaro, the chief of ESPN, and other company executives about the future of linear TV such as ABC and ESPN, and how these areas might or might not meaningfully connect with Disney+. At most, this suggests that Iger believes that Staggs and Mayer have the ability to help guide the company forward. Neither Staggs nor Mayer, I should point out, are presently Disney employees. They are both still attached to Candle Media, but this situation creates the possibility that if these current planning discussions are successful, that Iger might bring them back under the Disney umbrella to prepare Staggs or a combination of Staggs and Mayer to eventually take over the company. To do that, though, Disney would need to acquire Candle Media. It appears now that Disney has recently moved forward with at least some strategies discussed at these meetings. Less than a month after Staggs and Mayer consulted on Disney's linear TV holdings, Disney announced that ESPN would partner with Penn Entertainment to create an ESPN-branded sports betting platform in the 16 states where online sportsbooks are legal. Penn Entertainment presently partners with Barstool Sports to create an online sportsbook, but will rebrand their site with ESPN. What's interesting here is that Disney is not licensing the ESPN brand to one of the biggest sportsbooks in the U.S., that would be FanDuel or DraftKings. They are licensing it to the 5th largest, Penn Entertainment. This likely means that talks with more established sportsbooks didn't pan out with a desirable licensing deal. The licensing deal with Penn will last 10 years, giving ESPN, aka Disney, $1.5 billion in cash and $500 million worth of Penn stock warrants. Penn, in return, receives exclusive branding rights in sports betting for ESPN. According to Barron's, $1.5 billion was roughly half what Disney had hoped for when it first floated the possibility of licensing the ESPN name to a sportsbook. Again, according to Barron's, initially Disney had looked for a $3 billion 10-year deal with other companies. Analyst Richard Greenfield with Lightshed explained, "All the major sportsbooks have appeared to pass, with only Penn willing to cut ESPN a large, albeit far less than originally desired, annual licensing check for the ESPN brand." The deal also ties ESPN to Penn for a decade, which may limit how ESPN can expand in other ways. And this brings up the question, what is Disney planning to do with ESPN? A few weeks ago on the podcast, we talked about the concept of moral temperature being a key to Disney's identity and its long-term success, at least in North America. Sports betting, I'm guessing, is outside the moral temperature that most people associate with Disney, which can be a problem for the company. A move towards sports betting in the U.S. to me seems more like a strategy to elevate the value of ESPN so that it can be sold off, and this would align with other company moves from earlier in the year. When Iger recently reorganized the company, he created just 3 divisions. One division, called Disney Entertainment, contains the various studios, TV projects, and the streamer. Another division, called Disney Parks Experiences and Products, contains the resorts, the cruise lines, Adventures by Disney Publishing, and all of the consumer products. Each of these first 2 divisions absorbed many activity centers in the company. The far smaller third division was called simply ESPN, which allowed ESPN to continue to exist as a self-contained unit. Starting this fall, ESPN is even expected to release its own financial results, which may help demonstrate its financial worth to potential buyers. Admittedly, there are 2 ways of understanding the decision to sequester ESPN in its own division. If Disney retains ESPN, the separate division creates a partial brand firewall between ESPN and the other 2 divisions where Mickey and Minnie exist. Mickey is over in the Parks division and the Entertainment division, but not so much at ESPN. But I think that this may be a nearly impossible magic trick for the company to pull off, simply for the company to pretend that ESPN is not deeply integrated into other company areas. Last I checked, there were a couple hundred highly developed acres of Disney World called the ESPN Wide World of Sports. Though Mickey and Minnie aren't part of the ESPN network, they do appear for special events over at the ESPN Wide World of Sports, so I think it will be nearly impossible to fully wall off the family-centered elements of the Disney company from ESPN and its ties to sports betting. Again, the largest advantage to licensing ESPN to PENN, as I see it, is to make ESPN easier to sell off. Iger has said that he wants to better monetize ESPN rather than selling it off, but its configuration at the company suggests that Iger is at least open to the idea of selling it. As ESPN is in its own dedicated division, ESPN can cleanly be removed from the Disney company very easily. The sports betting platform helps define ESPN as a company that has influence and value in areas outside of traditional cable. And who might buy ESPN? Well, a couple of likely future homes are Apple and Amazon, both of whom embrace more mature entertainment than Disney and are also looking to expand their footprint in streaming, perhaps more into sports. But let's shift now to other areas of the company to see how the company might improve its stock price in the near future. One key area important to improving the stock price is the return of the dividend. Disney said that it will reinstate its dividend at the end of 2023, though it also warned that it will be a small dividend. This undoubtedly will add value to the stock, but to significantly raise the stock price, its divisions will need to perform better. In looking over the fall film and streaming release schedule for Disney, I'm simply not seeing anything there that will likely spur a meaningful and long-term increase in their stock price. Nor do I see something inside the resorts, or at least inside the American resorts, that will do the same. Resort visitation at Disney World, as we discussed last week, remains soft. So soft that Disney is presently offering various hotel discounts to lure fans back to the resort all the way through 2024. The resorts are still viewed as mostly successful financial drivers in the company, despite some obvious problems. On the earnings call, none of the analysts were focused on the problems of the parks. A typical earnings call has 2 parts: a scripted presentation by the CEO and the CFO, followed by questions from professional analysts. Questions here almost always point to areas of perceived weakness inside of a company. On this earnings call, the questions were largely focused on Disney+, the future of linear networks, the changing face of ESPN, and the company's plan to improve box office results for future films. No analysts asked about weakened visitation at the parks, as the parks in terms of revenue were still a strength area in the Disney company. This is supported in the current financials. Even though the period of pent-up demand is over, the parks are still profitable. Profits for the U.S. parks did fall by 13%, but despite lower attendance, particularly in Florida, they still produced a $1.4 billion profit for the quarter. I suspect a good chunk of that profit is directly related to the $15 to $35 per day per person cost of Genie+. Because of this, there's little chance that Genie+ will go away in the near future, especially not while the Disney company needs this division to produce a profit to offset financial problems in films and streaming. But the lack of questions about the future of the American resorts, I feel, is extremely short-sighted unless you're only concerned about the next quarter's earnings. In Florida, Universal is opening a new theme park and also adding attractions to its other parks. In California, it's developing a new roller coaster based on Fast and Furious. The lack of announced projects at Disney suggests that Disney will need to offer discounts to fill rooms and to fill the parks in Florida once Universal opens Epic Universe, a re-themed Splash Mountain, which will likely open within months of Epic Universe, will do little to elevate interest in the Disney parks in Florida, and a lack of planning here will have stock price consequences in future years. Analysts did have questions about Disney's recent poor box office results, such as with the new Indiana Jones film. About this, Iger said that he would become more involved with future studio releases, but the current crop of box office disappointments were mostly developed and produced during Chapek's reign as CEO. It takes years for a typical studio film to move through production, so we're still looking at another year or so before all of the productions greenlit under Chapek are finished. There were also questions about future releases, which suggested that there was some concern about upcoming releases as well. I'm guessing one key issue is with The Marvels, which premieres theatrically in November. In large part, this movie is a continuation of Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel's story, but the Disney Plus series Miss Marvel, which was designed to set up the Marvels film, was the lowest watched Marvel miniseries on the streamer. Here's the problem. How many people want to see a film that in large part continues the story of a character they don't know? Disney's current solution is to put the 6-part Miss Marvel miniseries on ABC for network viewers. The first 3 episodes aired last Friday, August 5th, and the final 3 episodes of Miss Marvel will air on August 12th. But for all 3 episodes of Miss Marvel that have currently aired on network TV, they did poorly, with ABC landing in 3rd place for each episode, substantially behind NBC and CBS, so the lack of familiarity with a key character will likely still be a problem for the Marvels when it comes out in theaters in 3 months. Then there was discussion on the earnings call about the strike. The current writers and actors strike has stopped production on almost everything. The strike is in its 4th month. It's damaging for everyone, the studios, the actors, and the writers. If it continues well into fall, studios will need to adjust their release schedule for many projects, and those on strike will face some difficult financial situations. In ways, this strike was inevitable, as it's mostly focused on how to distribute revenue in the new world of streaming, something that wasn't covered well in previous contracts. That is, there was almost surely going to be a disruption to production as the two sides worked toward middle ground. But during these past 3 months, Hopefully, the strike has also allowed the Disney company space to reevaluate some projects that are in pre-production, perhaps sending some back for redevelopment or stepping away from others. That is, the strike allowed studio executives space to reevaluate projects currently in development without having to focus on other scripts presently in production. I'd like the strike to conclude as soon as possible, as would most people, but I'm also hopeful that this production break might produce a stronger slate of projects for 2025 and beyond. Multiple analysts in their questions pointed to the largest concern, which remains Disney+. Disney films, to put it bluntly, can be improved with better scripts and a larger focus on story development. Improvements to the streamer, however, require major revisions to how the service develops and acquires content, how the service is marketed, how the service creates revenue, and how it connects with or doesn't connect with fan groups. Carefully repositioning Disney Plus is a far more complex and nuanced problem to solve. The major streamers such as Disney, Max, and Netflix are all searching ways to move forward toward better profitability. If Disney could show a profit in streaming, that would surely push the stock price higher. But the only way to get there, I think, is through a reduction in new content and a substantially higher subscription cost. And both of those were mentioned on the earnings call. Disney has started to carefully examine content for the streamer, focusing on shows that will drive subscriptions rather than shows that simply fill content categories. These factors will lower costs. Disney has also announced that it will soon raise prices yet again. This will be a difficult balancing act. Disney needs to reduce the number of shows, but keep the right programs to attract and retain subscribers. This means that at the same time Disney reduces content, it needs to raise rates, charging more for less. And so here I'm sure you can see the obvious challenges. Add into this another element related to the writers and actors strike. Both unions are targeting streaming arrangements. Writers and actors want more money when their work shows up on streamers like Disney+. Almost surely, more generous and equitable arrangements will be placed into any new contract governing their work with streaming, which will improve the quality of their lives, but will also add additional costs to streaming content for all studios, which will almost surely be passed on to the consumer. So part of these subscription price increases will cover new contract costs as well. Also, this coming round of rate increases in October are probably not enough to make the streamer profitable, at least not after the strike, once it re-engages production and production costs to create new shows. The future of the overall streaming ecosystem will surely create fewer yet more expensive streamers. Paramount might combine forces with either another studio or a network to create either a bundled package or a mega streamer, likely at a much higher price. Disney will shed less popular content to save money and will continue to raise prices on the existing service, and Warner will reconfigure its model so that shows premiere on Max and then are later licensed out to second and third tier ad-driven platforms like Tubi. But this mostly means that we're now at the end of low-priced streaming, which was always the plan, but one that is moving far more quickly than I initially imagined. Disney Plus started at $6.99 per month for the ad-free service. Now it's $10.99 per month. Also, Iger on the earnings call confirmed that there would be another price hike soon. The specifics of these increases were not part of the call, but elsewhere Disney announced that ad-free Disney Plus would rise on October 12th to the new price of $13.99 per month for U.S. customers. With this, the price of Disney Plus has doubled in less than 4 years. For comparison, Apple Plus launched at $4.99 per month. Now it's $6.99 per month. Later this month, Peacock will hike its price for the first time since the service premiered in 2020. Peacock's ad-free service will go up by $2. The ad-supported service will go up by just $1, and so on. With inexpensive streaming fading away, most families moving forward will be more careful about deciding which streaming services or bundles they subscribe to. And this will be another pressure that Disney will need to manage. One of the big questions right now is this. Disney lost very few high-value subscribers when it last raised rates in the U.S., but will the majority of its subscriber base follow them from a $10.99 price point to a $13.99 price point? I believe the real goal here for Disney is to move as quickly as the market will allow them to around $16 per month, roughly where Netflix and Max are presently, but also with a plan to let subscribers transition, if they so choose, over to an ad-supported $7.99 per month plan. Iger, on the earnings call, explained that 40% of new subscribers in the U.S. are choosing the lower-cost, ad-supported Disney Plus model. Disney Plus currently has 3.3 million U.S. subscribers on its ad-supported option. But will current subscribers, unwilling to pay the $13.99 per month for the traditional service, downgrade their subscription to an ad-supported option at $7.99 per month, or will they simply just unsubscribe? The inclusion of this statement during the earnings call suggests that Disney might be trying to move some of its audience to the ad-based version, as ad revenue plus a lower subscription price might actually bring in more money overall than straight ad-free subscriptions. If so, I'm not sure how successful this plan will be. Personally, I've lived without ads that interrupt programming for so long with Hulu, Netflix, and Disney Plus that I would find it very difficult to go back to ad-integrated TV. If customers feel too much of a financial squeeze, I think they're more likely to cancel in frustration or thoughtfully subscribe to Disney Plus intermittently, maybe for a few months a year as a seasonal subscriber. Let's say that people in this seasonal group subscribe each year for the summer. And during those 3 months, they could easily catch up on any Disney Plus content that was released during the previous year. This, I think, is the more likely problem that faces the higher-priced Disney Plus model, particularly with younger viewers who, from personal observation, I've noticed are far more aware of how to limit cost with streaming services than are older viewers. Disney likely has a difficult path ahead. Overall, subscription levels have fallen for 3 straight quarters now. Presently, they are at 146.1 million subscribers worldwide, down from a high of 164.2 million 9 months ago. Most of these losses were expected as Disney Plus Hotstar chose not to renew television rights to professional cricket games, which are popular in India. The low-cost Disney Plus Hotstar subscriptions in India contribute very little to Disney's bottom line, as they are priced far lower than subscriptions in North America or Europe. This shift away from such programming, such as professional cricket in India, defines Disney Plus's new strategy. Initially, Disney Plus was looking to create subscriber growth with a wide range of programming, including overseas sports. But now Disney Plus is directed toward profitability and focused on creating shows strongly related to their key brands, such as Star Wars, Marvel, and Disney Animation, that play well worldwide. Beyond India and their millions of cricket fans who have logged off of Disney Plus, there's been a small but steady loss in the North American subscription numbers as well, partially driven by rate hikes. Regardless, overall subscribers are not the main metric that the company or investors care about. It's overall profit or presently reducing overall losses. The higher subscription costs in North America and Europe have the possibility of substantially increasing revenue and moving the streamer at least toward profitability, even if it loses some subscribers in the process, so long as that loss is less than 20%. If Disney raises its price to $13.99 and then loses 25% of its North American subscription base, it will lose money. But if it only loses 15% of its subscribers, it's still money ahead. That's the game that's being rolled out right now. But if Disney can keep those losses to around 2 or 3% or even 5%, those rate increases will then meaningfully help the streamer move toward profitability. But to keep most of those subscribers satisfied, the streamer needs to have highly desirable new content each month, which drives up production costs that Iger is presently trying to limit. And again, here you can easily see the overall problem. In a strange way, there's an upside to these price increases, particularly if you're fans of the parks. For the last 4 years, some very profitable areas at Disney have subsidized divisions running at a loss. In the early years of Disney Plus, the plan was to prioritize growth over profit, which meant the service ran at a loss. Some of those quarterly losses under Chapek were staggering, with the service losing over $1 billion in a single quarter. This established a system whereby profitable divisions, specifically the parks, backfilled losses at Disney Plus to balance the company's overall books. Or to put it this way, you may have been paying $6.99 for Disney Plus when it came out, but if you were also at the parks, many of those $30 per day Genie Plus upgrades you bought were also being used to underwrite the streaming service, not to improve the parks. In a strange way, deep Disney fans were paying both at the parks and through their monthly subscription to keep Disney Plus going. If the next round or two of price increases moves the streaming service to a cost-neutral position, or even better, to actual profitability, then the profit from the parks raised through Genie Plus can be used to expand the parks. This has been one of the underlying problems for the past 4 years. Not only is Disney light on Imagineers to design new rides and experiences for the American parks, they are also light on money because money raised by the parks hasn't been used to improve the parks. It's been used to a large extent to shore up the fledgling and at times faltering Disney Plus service. And so with this, we're at another interesting crossroads with the company. No studio has a firm grasp as to how to move streaming to profitability, though pretty much everyone agrees that streaming is the future of home content. Likewise, the writing is on the wall that the value of theatrical releases will likely continue to decline. Just 2 films, Barbie and Oppenheimer, largely supported theater chains this summer. But with the writers and actors strikes now in their 4th month, it's increasingly likely that studios will need to pull releases from next summer's lineup. Many theater chains barely survived the COVID closures, and some didn't. Even those that did survive, such as Regal, closed dozens of locations. Another supply interruption of theatrical titles caused by an extended strike will almost surely lead to new theater closures, which in turn will reduce the financial viability of the theatrical release model moving forward. And this is roughly where we find ourselves right now, somewhere between the old pre-COVID world of film production and the new world that is more focused on streaming and film-like series at home. A world that no one presently knows how to effectively manage. Multiple studios are taking educated guesses as to how to best move forward, and this is the path that Disney is presently moving down, trying to get to a new space where hopefully all of the key divisions at the company move toward a higher level of profitability, a new space of higher financial returns that is at least many months, if not a couple of years, away. So, between our episode last Sunday about developments at the parks and our episode today about changes at the Disney company, you are now all caught up, not only on the news, but how these announcements will change the future of films, parks, and the streaming service. I'll be back on Sunday. I've got a short episode that I'm putting together, but today's episode is intended as our main episode for the week. But still, I'll see you on Sunday. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes. But the best reason to join is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can become a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until then, this is Todd James Pierce.